There was a TV show a while back, probably before the pandemic. Kind of hard to remember things before the pandemic, but anyway, it was called Undercover Boss. And what I enjoyed about it was the fact that the boss actually oftentimes is so disconnected, especially if he's boss of a rather large corporation that has businesses all around the country. He or she really doesn't get what's going on. And I like that they disguise themselves in some way and go take on they go get hired, and of course, they have to explain the cameras following them, but and usually that's we're doing a documentary on somebody. I'm sure that after a little while, if people knew about the TV show, they'd begin to wonder every time a camera shows up at any kind of business. So, we're just watching new hires, and see how their work goes. But anyway, and then of course at the end, the boss usually meets some pretty amazing people and has some sad situations to deal with, and the boss can then divvy out some reward. Well, they're not rewards in the sense, but they're gifts and whatnot that the folks give or get. Part of it is because they're loyal and trying to do the best job they can. They may not be perfect, but the boss helps them. And I think there's been even a couple of times where the boss came across somebody that probably should have been fired, but the individual was given a second chance, and I like those kinds of bosses. Anyway, that's kind of what Jesus did in a way. He is, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But we're looking at Hebrews, and this is part of my series on faith. And I'm going to focus on Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, but mostly on verse 2. Therefore, since we have a great cloud of witnesses, martyrs, surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And so what the writer's doing here at the end, and of course he's just had this tremendous chapter about faith. Faith being the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen, and how men and women of old gained approval, and without faith it is impossible to please God. We don't please God by our achievements. We please God by our loyalty. And I think that's really what faith is, in a way, is a sense of loyalty. But in Hebrews 12:2, Jesus is presented as finishing the race, and we're setting our eyes on him. Now, this is really kind of important because, you see, Jesus has run the race and finished for us as we should have. And, this is something we need to see about Jesus. He's not only our sacrifice for our sins, but he's also the example of what we should have been and why the sacrifice is needed. So all we have to do is look at him, and this is what God wanted from humanity. Jesus is the true human being. He is what God wanted from each and every one of us. And in the Hebrew writer, I think, sort of sets us up as you look through it, that's why Jesus could forgive us or be the sacrifice, is because he ran the race that we should have run, and therefore he became, he took our place. And so that's why we need to fix our eyes on him as our goal. But let's look at kind of how the Hebrew writer sort of takes us through that. First of all, in order to run the race that we should have run, he has to share in our nature. Chapter 2, verse 14, therefore, since the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise also partook of the same, that through death he might render powerless him who had the power of death, that is, the devil. So the writer says that Jesus shares in our nature. Now, from those who know the language, the idea that we share it's an ongoing condition, something that's always been and something that always will be. I mean, that's something that we share. We are born this way. But it says he himself partook, that is, he made the choice before taking on this. And so Jesus came and shared in our nature as his choice in order to be like one of us. And because of that, he can run the race for us. But he also shares in our weakness as well. In chapter 5, in verse 2 of Hebrews, it says that a high priest is taken from among men, humanity, and appointed on behalf of men in things pertaining to God, to offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins, and he can deal gently with the ignorant and misguided, since he himself is also beset with weakness. So in the Old Testament, high priests were humans, pure and simple, and they had all the they shared in the nature of those that they represented before God in the tabernacle and in the temple. But they themselves shared in our weakness. And here I think that talks about, our us in our relationship with God, or in comparison to God. God is all powerful. He does not, he is not weakened by things that happen around us. And I think that part of that is the idea of our desires. Our desires are what weaken us, because we constantly want things. We are constantly going after things. I've noticed about me that I had this watch that tracked my steps, and and kept track of my heartbeat. And it was pretty good. It was real simple. It didn't do much else except tell time. And I'd get up in the morning. It would track. The watch itself wouldn't track, but it would through my phone. Use the GPS and track my walking and tell me how fast I walked and how many steps I walked and what my heart rate was during it. I was pretty happy with that. And then they came out with kind of a newer version, only this time the GPS was built into the watch. And it had a few other features. Plus, I found out, because I've got supplemental Medicare insurance, that I get the free service, that they have. And so I got that. But unfortunately, the phone had some problems, and I was not happy. And then I got some birthday money and some other money, and so I upgraded to their almost smartwatch, and I'm still not happy with it. It seems like, the more I get, the less happy I am. And that's really our weakness, isn't it? As humans, we have these desires, and they're not fully met, and that's our weakness. And we just keep going and moving in the wrong direction because of that. And that's why Jesus shares also in our temptations. We have this, the weakness, I think, is our nature, our desires. And, we look around, and Satan is constantly tempting us. In chapter 4, verse 15, it says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but we have one who's been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." And earlier in chapter 2:18, it says, "For he himself was tempted in that which he suffered, and he was able to come to the aid of those who are tempted." So he shares in our temptations. He's a real human being. He has all the desires that we have. The thing that I went through with the watch, Jesus could have just as easily gone through that if he was here in our day and time as a real human being. Now, the Hebrew writer seems to think that, or seems to indicate that he's been tempted in all things. And pretty sure that that doesn't mean that every single temptation that could ever appear on the face of the earth, Jesus went through. But Jesus went through the gamut. He went through enough that he understands. And the writer says, yet he is without sin. So you see, he has our weakness, which is just our nature. It's not our sinful self. Or weakness is not sin. Weakness is just the fact that we are able to be tempted to kind of move towards sin. That means, we're always moving in the wrong direction and thinking in the wrong direction because there's all these temptations. And even if it's things about watches, which may or may not be sinful in and of themselves, it just shows the fact that we're just sort of always unsatisfied. But Jesus has run the gamut and yet without sin. And I think that the reason why in chapter 4, verse 15, it says that he can sympathize with our weakness is because he knows the power and the allure of temptation far more than we do. He has been on the other side. He stands back and looks at it, having said no to all of it. We are still in the middle of it. We don't know how powerful temptation is because we give in way too soon. But Jesus also shares in our death as a result of that. In chapter 2, verse 9, but we do see him who was made for a little while lower than the angels, namely Jesus, because of the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Now later on it talks about those who have tasted the heavenly gift and fallen away. And someone said, well, they just tasted it. They just got a little bitty bite. And I always have to laugh at that because we've got my wife and I have this tower garden. It's hydroponic, aeroponic kind of hybrid. It's got water in the base where we put the nutrients and it shoots it up through this tower, and then it filters down on the inside of the tower to the roots of the things we want to grow. And I bought this red pepper plant and I put it in there, and it was really growing prolific. And had these nice little red peppers. And for the longest time, for some reason or other, I just kept forgetting it was there and not going out and getting them and putting them in my salad. So one day I'm out because I've got lettuce on there and thought, oh, I'm going to take one of these. And so I took a couple of them off, and I immediately just bit on one, in order to taste it. And I had forgotten that this red pepper bush was habanero red pepper bush. I got a taste that just went boom in my mouth. And so the idea of taste is to get the full flavor. We use it to, taste, to see what I want to eat as the full meal. But that's not Jesus tasted death. He went and got the full flavor of death from beginning to end. And so you see, Jesus came down to become one of us, shared in our nature, shared in all the desires and in the temptations that we face, and then shared in our death. But while he was doing that, he learned obedience. Right? I know this may sound odd, but chapter 5 and verse 8, it says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered, and having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. So while he was here, he had to learn obedience just like we did. When I was growing up, I had to learn that when mom and dad said no, they meant no. I also had to learn that, when they said be home by 10 o'clock, that meant 10 o'clock. So I, growing up, I had to learn obedience. And Jesus had to learn obedience if he was going to be like one of us. If he's going to share in our nature, if he's going to share in our weakness, share in our temptations, then he has to share in our obedience as well. And so he learned obedience as a human. He understood what it was like. But he also learned to trust God. In chapter 5 and verse 7, before that verse, in the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety. Now, I think that earlier in chapter 2, verse 18, where it says, "For since he himself was tempted in that which he suffered," that there might be a reference here to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is there. And he said, he knows what's about to happen. He knows he's going to be arrested. He knows he's going to be tried. He knows that he's going to go through this kangaroo court with the Sanhedrin Council, and then with Pilate, and with Herod along the way too. And he knows that eventually he's going to be nailed to the cross. He can't stop that, although he asked the Father, said, "If there's any other way, please let it happen." But of course, he said, "Nevertheless, not my will, but your will." But I think that here the writer is sort of presenting him as somewhat similar to David. In David's Psalms, they're full of laments and cries, asking God to stop his suffering, to help him. In fact, scholars now think that Psalm 1 and 2 are sort of the introduction and the lead-in, and and then Psalm 3 kind of begins where the book of Psalms is going to take us, and it's a psalm of David when he was on the run from Absalom. And so here is the king on the run from his own son, exiled. Now, it didn't start at the beginning of David's suffering, it starts in the middle. And, we might to some degree say that part of this David brought on himself with the sin with Bathsheba. But nonetheless, David lamented and cried to God, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So here he's kind of presented as David. And so he learned obedience and he learned to trust. He learned to have faith, just like we do and we need to. And so because of that, he became our forerunner. Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 20, where Jesus entered as a forerunner on the other side of the veil for us, having become a high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. You can probably find a lot of people talk about that. It's an advanced scout for the army, a herald who goes in before a dignitary preparing the people for the one coming. William Lane, in his commentary on Hebrews, says he's a pace setter. That is, he gets out in front and he runs the race the way everybody else should, and then he finishes and stands there, and everybody then fixes their eyes on him in order to finish like him. One commentator that I read said it's someone who arrives and then prepares for others who are following him. And that's exactly what Jesus does. He goes beyond the veil, or he enters within the veil. And you need to kind of see that as the veil is that which separates us from the very presence of God. And so Jesus enters into the very presence of God because that's where we're headed as well. And so he arrives in order to prepare the place. And he's able to go there because he's now become our high priest. And Hebrews chapter 5, verse 1, for every high priest is taken from among men, humanity. Chapter 4, verse 14, therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. So you see, Jesus now becomes our high priest. And what's interesting is he doesn't just prepare the way beyond the veil into the presence of God. He doesn't just show us the way either. He actually, the writer says, sympathizes with our weakness. Again, Jesus knows the full power of Satan. He knows the full power of the temptations. And it's not that he says, well, you're just a bunch of wimps if you give in. And, we kind of act that way with others. We have this sort of, well, if I can do it, then you can do it. And we don't really realize what that's saying is that, well, I made it where you didn't. I'm smarter than you. I'm tougher than you, or whatever. Although some people say, well, I didn't think I was all that tough, but yet I made it. But there's always sort of the implication of, why aren't you making it? But Jesus can sympathize with us. Or maybe we should use the word empathize. To me, sympathy is where I see somebody suffering, and I understand what suffering is about, but I don't know their particular situation. Empathy is where I've actually been in their shoes before. But Jesus becomes our high priest who can sympathize. But then he is also our champion. Going back to Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author or the leader or champion and perfecter of our faith. He's really showing us what faith is like. He really is. Again, Jesus is showing us what it means to be fully human, to be the real humans that God created. This is what God wanted from us. Sometimes, we tend to think that because somebody, sins, or because somebody is tempted and they're, sympathetic, that's what it truly means to be human, to understand all of that. But that's really not. God didn't make us to be sinners. God didn't make us to give in to temptation. He made us to say no to it. And he expected that from us. William Lane, in his commentary on Hebrews, when he translated Hebrews 12 and verse 2, he said, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the champion in the exercise of faith, and the one who brought faith to complete expression. So he is the ultimate example of faith. He is the ultimate champion of it. You might have people that you look up to, spiritual mentors, spiritual leaders, people that you hold up as a great example and so forth. But there is none greater than Jesus. Jesus is the champion in the exercise of faith. He is the one who completed it first. And he brought faith to full expression. He's the one who helps us to see what faith is all about. And so, yes, we should trust in Jesus for our salvation. We should trust in his death, in his shedding of blood. We should trust in what he brings and gives to us. We should trust in the salvation that comes in the new covenant. But we also need to see that he's our example in what faith is all about. Jesus has finished the race, and so we need to focus on him. We need to focus on him setting the pace and giving it full expression. He shows us the immense properties of faith. The song, Trust and Obey, I believe it's verse 4 in our book, but it says that we never can prove the delights of his love until all on the altar we lay. Abraham was told by God to go sacrifice Isaac, yet Isaac was the promised one through whom his descendants would become like the stars of the sky and the sands of the earth. And yet if he kills them, how's that going to work? And so Abraham, though, never wavered, at least not in the story of Scripture he didn't, but he got everything ready, got Isaac ready, and off they went. And then when they got there, Isaac said, well, here's the wood, here's the rope, here's the knife, where's the ram? And Abraham said, well, God will take care of that. And so he tied Isaac up, put him on the altar, and then raised up the knife to kill him until all on the altar we lay. Most of us don't really have that. And Abraham is held up in the book of Romans as the father of the faithful, both of the Jews and the Gentiles, because he was faithful before he was circumcised as well as after. But Jesus takes it even beyond Abraham. And so not only should we look to Jesus for our salvation, but our example of faith as well. So Jesus, before he became the author of our salvation, he ran the same race that we are supposed to run. He sets the pace. His faith is the goal and full expression of our faith. And what I really like is that, as I said before, he understands our struggle in a way that not even we understand it. He went beyond Satan's power. I mean, fully beyond it. And because of that, he knows, what that power, how strong that power is. We we give up. We don't go, that full distance. And so we don't know. And we don't understand, but he does. And so Jesus came to bring eternal salvation to us, but he did it by showing us how to run the race and how to trust in God and how to have faith. And so if you want to have faith, the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, look to Jesus. It's okay to look at the other people along the way, no doubt, but see him as the prime example, and you won't go wrong. God bless.